So good to be with you this morning. Today we are starting a brand new series called Explore God. As you've heard leading up to now, we are joining with nearly 1,000 churches all around Chicagoland who are following the same 7-week series, exploring the big questions of life and of faith. And if any of these questions brought you here to our church today, we're so glad that they did. Today, in part 1, we're starting with a big question right out of the gate. Does life have a purpose? Does life have a purpose? In fact, what I'd love you to do is turn to someone next to you, nearby you. What feeling does that present to you when that question is asked? Does life have a purpose? Turn to someone next to you. What feeling comes up when that question is asked? Well, whatever feeling comes up, it's a question that might cause us to do some reflection. I can remember, even as a young man, one of the first times that I really began to reflect on this question. Growing up in Florida, we took a yearly trip out to Colorado, a ski trip around this time of year, which we always looked forward to. And one year, I decided that I wanted to give up snow skiing and I wanted to try snowboarding, okay? Because that's what all the cool kids were doing at that time. So I wanted to I grew up surfing in Florida, but I wanted to try to ride the snow and see what that was like. My brother's best friend, Mike, who had moved out to Colorado to work at a resort and live the ski life, he volunteered to take me out for the day and to teach me how to ride a snowboard. Little did I know just what was in store. Well, we started off, which made sense, on the bunny hill. It was a short hill with a small lift going up it. He taught me to try to balance, to try to hold the edge, and to make some turns. And I felt that I was kind of gaining some progress. And it wasn't before long that he said, "Okay, you're ready to go up the mountain." And I thought, "I am?" But we headed down the mountain to the big ski lift that took us up halfway. And I thought, okay, halfway up the mountain, this should probably be a good spot for us to kind of make our way down. But he said, you know what? It's such a beautiful day. It's a bluebird day. You know, the sky is wide open. The sun is shining. Let's go all the way up to the top of the mountain. And I thought, if you say so. I was just following Mike's lead. So we went up to the very top of the mountain, as high as you can go, and we began our descent. As we began this trek down the mountain, I lasted about 10 minutes on the snowboard itself before I realized that I wasn't equipped to get down that mountain, having just learned how to snowboard. What followed was 3 to 4 hours of slowly falling down the mountain. I in a sense, got completely out of this snowboard. I was locked into the boots for a few minutes, but got completely out and just began to either ride the snowboard itself down. I began to kind of just ride on my snow pants down. At what point, Mike was literally pulling me across the part of the mountain. It took forever, and I remember at one point we stopped, and I was hungry, I was tired, I was thirsty, and I had remembered that my mom had given me a chocolate bar. So Mike and I stopped, and we were looking out at this beautiful view, and we snapped the chocolate bar in half, and we each ate some to give us a little bit of energy to make it down the rest of the mountain. And I remember thinking, is this what life is like? Is this what was in store for me for the rest of my life? Just kind of going up to achieve something that I thought was going to provide some meaning, and to realize that I only have to kind of slide my way down? That what I was looking forward to didn't really bring the fulfillment that I thought? And it didn't last a long time, but that was one of my earliest memories of really reflecting on this question of purpose. And honestly, it made me feel a little scared. It made me feel, if this could be all that there is, well, I don't know how excited that I can be about that to live my life. I started thinking about why I might even be here on this earth, what my purpose may be. And at that point in time, I felt a little bit disappointed. If we're honest, if all of us are honest, this is probably a question we don't spend a lot of time thinking about, right? At least in a cosmic sense, does life have a purpose? That's not a typical casual conversation that you might have with someone with you across the dinner table or maybe over coffee. Does life have a purpose is a pretty big question. And I think when we ask that question, we can come to a fork in the road. We can come to a fork in the road, and we can go one way or the other. One way we might call pointless street, okay? That life itself is essentially pointless. That there's really no rhyme or reason to our existence. And if we take that road, it can leave us feeling a little uneasy with the sense that there's not a higher or greater purpose in life. Now, if we think about taking the other side of that fork, the other road, we could call that meaningful street. And if we go down this road, we might have a greater sense that life matters, but we still might struggle to answer some of the very basic questions of life itself, some of the simple questions of life. How will I spend my time? On what will I spend my money? What will I do with my life in my time? Really simple questions, but they're not always easy to answer. We may very well think about gaining our sense of purpose and meaning and identity from the things around us. Maybe we gain our sense of identity from our appearance, the way that we look, the way that we dress. Maybe we get it from our work, what we do or have done for a living. Or maybe through our relationships, who we spend time with, our family and friends. Maybe we try to answer this big question through those lenses. Thomas Merton was a Trappist monk. He reflected on this question quite a bit, and he once wrote, "If you want to know my identity, don't ask me where I live, what I eat, or how I comb my hair. Ask me what I live for. Better yet, ask me what keeps me from living the life that I want to live." One of the earliest records we have of someone reflecting on this question was a king over the great ancient nation of Israel. This was David's son, King David's son, who would become King Solomon. Solomon was the most powerful, the most influential, and the person who experienced arguably the most that anyone had up to that point in the history of the world. Solomon wrote a book called Ecclesiastes, which is in the Bible. It's probably not a book we read all that often. It's kind of a perplexing book, but in it he reflects on the meaning of life. Now, Solomon was not an atheist. He didn't necessarily doubt the existence of God itself, but he was asking the question, does God matter? If God exists, does God matter? Does God make a difference in our life or in the world? And he had some grim conclusions, as we'll read this morning, but he comes to a great truth at the end of his work. We're going to read several selected verses from Ecclesiastes. We're going to take a sort of an overview. We're going to look at some of the popular highlights, if you will, throughout this book, beginning in the very first chapter. Solomon lays out part of his thesis in verse 2 of chapter 1. In it, he says this. This is how he begins his book. "Perfectly pointless," says the teacher. Perfectly pointless. Everything is pointless. Well, doesn't that excite you? Doesn't that motivate you? Solomon was saying, as he looked around, as rich as he was, as experienced as he was, as rich and wise as he was, none of that brought him true meaning and purpose. The truth is, those things can distract us from the question, maybe even provide us some temporary pleasure, but they will not reveal our purpose to us. In reflecting on all that he did and all that he accomplished in the next chapter, in chapter 2, Solomon describes in detail everything he did. He writes this in verse 4. I took on great projects. I built houses for myself, planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, planting every kind of fruit tree in them. I made reservoirs for myself to water my lush groves. I acquired male servants and female servants. I even had slaves born into my house. I also had great herds of cattle and sheep, more than any who preceded me in Jerusalem. I amassed silver and gold for myself, the treasures of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers for myself, along with every human luxury, treasure chests galore. So I became far greater than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Moreover, my wisdom stood by me. I refrained from nothing that my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. Indeed, my heart found pleasure from the results of my hard work. That was the reward from all my hard work. But when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had worked so hard to achieve, I realized that it was pointless, a chasing after wind. Nothing is to be gained under the sun. As one old translation said, vanity, all vanity. Isn't that perplexing? After everything that Solomon had done, after everything he accomplished, his conclusion was that it was pointless, meaningless. If there was meaning to be found in some of these experiences and accomplishments, you would think that Solomon would have found it, wouldn't you? I mean, there really wasn't anything he didn't do. He could go anywhere. He could possess just about anything, and the sum total of all of that was pointless. There was no enduring, eternal sense of meaning in any of it. That is his conclusion. But there is something more. He doesn't leave us hanging just there. Even despite everything he had accomplished, he did see that there was something behind the scenes, something operating behind all the pleasures of life around us. And it begins to talk about it in the next chapter, in chapter 3. In verse 9, he writes this: "What do workers gain from all their hard work? I have observed the task God has given human beings." And this is key, what he writes in verse 11. God has made everything fitting in its time, but has also placed eternity in their hearts, without enabling them to discover what God has done from beginning to end. Solomon reflects on the truth that God has put eternity in our hearts. While not everything God has ever done is revealed to us, God has placed an eternal yearning within us, a desire to search for meaning, to search for purpose, That eternity in our hearts is our longing to make a difference in this world, is our longing to have people in our lives that matter to us. Eternity in our hearts is greater than anything we could ever acquire, greater than anything we could ever become. Solomon channels Augustine, a great father of the church, who once wrote this. You have made, about God, he wrote this, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find rest in you. We long for eternity. We long for purpose and meaning. And Solomon lets us in on a little secret. It's not going to be found in anything we can achieve. It's only going to be found in someone who put everything together. Solomon concludes his book in the 12th chapter, and he offers a concluding thought that brings all of this together. In chapter 12, verse 13, Solomon writes, "So this is the end of the matter. All has been heard. Worship God and keep God's commandments, because this is what everyone must do." Solomon came to understand that it was worth honoring God, that it meant something to follow God. In fact, that would provide the greatest meaning in life. That would be the point in an otherwise pointless world. If you're taking mental or physical notes today, the point really is this: life is meaningless without God, but God gives everything meaning. It's hard to think of an equivalent to Solomon in today's world. Though I recently watched an interview with Bill Gates, who, as you probably know, was recently dethroned as the wealthiest person in the world by Jeff Bezos of Amazon. But over the last 24 years, Bill Gates was the richest person in the world for 18 of those years, if you can believe it. He became a billionaire at age 21. Now, for those who are keeping score at home, a billion is 1,000 million. A million seems like a lot to me, and he has many of those. As I watched the interview with Bill Gates, I was struck by how much all his wealth and influence didn't seem to matter all that much to him. Now, that's a bit of an overstatement. But what mattered more to him in this interview, as the interviewer was kind of prodding and prompting about the luxurious things he might have done with his wealth, it was much more about his work and his influence and his meaning and purpose in life. To put a PC in every home in the world. In fact, he went on to describe his charity work. And the truth is, he's given more to charity and to causes to alleviate suffering in this world probably than anyone ever has in the history of the world. That's what he talked most about, the work of his foundation. I read something else from another interview when he said this. He said, "I can understand people wanting to have millions of dollars. I can understand it. It provides a sense of security and a meaningful freedom. But I have to tell you, even after all that, the hamburger still tastes the same." what about you? What sense of meaning and purpose has come to mind as we've been reflecting on this big and ancient question today? Jesus, in his recorded sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, talked about meaning and purpose. He actually said, don't worry. Don't worry about your life, about what you'll eat, what you'll drink, what you'll wear. And Jesus even uses Solomon as a sermon illustration. He says, look at the lilies in the field. Take a look. Look around you. They're perfectly created and designed. And Jesus says, Solomon, in all his wealth and in all his glory, was not adorned like they are. So don't worry. Don't worry about what you'll be, what you'll do. But here's what you should worry about. Worry about seeking the kingdom of God and God's righteousness. Put that first place in your life. Let that be your North Star. And guess what? Everything else will be given to you. Don't seek to just accumulate wealth for yourself. Don't seek to simply gain possessions, to become the person on social media with the most followers or fans or friends. But seek first God, and the meaning of life will be revealed to you, and you will find your purpose in it. What would it look like for you to put God first place in your life? To seek God's kingdom and righteousness above everything else. Some of you may have learned this as a child, but a long-standing tradition in Reformed churches was the process or the practice of catechesis, learning about the faith, growing in the faith, being formed in it. One of the tools that they use to equip children in the faith is the Westminster Catechism, though there are two, and the shorter catechism was used to help encourage the faith to pass it on to the next generation. The very first question in the shorter catechism is one that probably many of you know, or at least you've heard of before. And many of you maybe even memorized it or learned it when you were younger. What is the chief end of man? What is humanity's ultimate purpose? That second part was my question. The chief end of man, as the answer follows, is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. To glorify God and enjoy Him forever. Now that's an ancient truth. That truth is really old. But guess what? It is still true. When we glorify God with our lives, when we are living fully the life that God has promised to us, that will be our greatest enjoyment. That will be our greatest sense of pleasure. Greater than any career accolade. Greater than any significant thing we would have ever purchased or acquired in our lives. Greater than any place we could ever go or see. Does life have a purpose? Well, sometimes life itself seems pretty pointless. And the truth is, everything can seem that way without God. But with God, everything has a point. Everything has a purpose. Everything has meaning. And that's not just true in a cosmic sense, but that's true in a personal one. That's true in your life and in your heart today. Because guess what? God has placed the longing to answer that question. God has placed eternity in your heart. What does it look like for us to explore that question, to explore God, by keeping God ahead of everything else, and in doing so, to enjoy Him forever? Amen.